Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for this second installment of our Back to Business webinar series presented by our amazing partners at Audi. Today we have an incredible lineup of speakers here, and we are just so excited to get into this topic that is super important for everybody. So just a couple of notes on how this is going to work. It is going to be recorded, and then by next week, the recording is going to be available on both jamesbeard.org and our news site, openforgood.com, which I'll drop in the chat so you all can see it. We're going to save questions for the end as time allows. We have a lot of stuff to get through today, so just feel free to send them through as you have them, and we'll make sure that, that our panelists get them today. If you are having technical difficulties, just message us using that question function and we will do our best to work that out for you. So that is a very short and sweet intro for me, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hassel and Ariel, who are moderating our panel today, and I'll get out of the way, but thank you guys so much.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I know I'm excited for today, and we have a lot of really inspirational conversation that's about to kick off. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I can tell from the conversation we had earlier this week in preparation that all of our panelists are super excited about. So I'm Ariel Coplan, and I'm one of the co-founders of Not 9 to 5, and I'm a chef by trade.
Thanks, Ariel. I am Hassel Aviles. I'm the other co-founder of Not 9 to 5, and yeah, as Ariel said, this is a topic very close to my heart. And I always think it's best when people introduce themselves. So I'm going to allow Suzanne and Alex and Lauren to introduce yourself, if you don't mind. Do you want to kick it off, Suzanne?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Chef Suzanne Barre. I currently live in Toronto, but I really started my roots in New York in kitchens, and I'm an advocate here, advocating for safer spaces, for fair and equal pay, for equal work. And I'm very, very, very thrilled and honored to be on this conversation. I think we all know that during this time we've been going mentally through so many different challenges. And I think it's about that time to really dig deep and go deep into steps and practical, I guess, advances that we can do in order to help ourselves through some struggling moments in our careers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Jump. I'm the head bartender at Death & Company in Denver, Colorado, which is where I've lived for the last 3.5 years. I'm from Tennessee originally. And I'm the founder of Focus on Health, which my business partner LP is also on this call, and she'll speak to herself. But we founded it earlier this year, really actually right before restaurant closure, and then really found a even larger need to be hosting conversations like this as the year has progressed. But Focus on Health for us is an opportunity to start having conversations about health and wellness that people have been afraid to have when it comes to the hospitality industry, and really focusing on taking care of the people who spend their entire lives taking care of others. So that's what we do at Focus on Health. LP?
Hello, everyone. My name is LP. I'm one of the co-founders of Focus on Health, and yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to be here, psyched to be here. You know, a lot of the things that we do with the programming that we offer focuses on all facets of health, so really exploring things that we don't necessarily believe affect parts of our wellness, and you know, we acknowledge that there are many things that do. So excited to chat with you all today.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Alex and Suzanne, for the introductions. I realized that I skipped over also where we're coming at you from. So Ariel and Suzanne and I are in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. So I really love that this conversation is kind of cross-border, and it really speaks to the fact that this topic really is relevant wherever you live. I've been on panels and discussed this topic, you know, with people from the UK, from Europe, from all over the world. So you know, when it comes to a lot of what you're going to listen to, it doesn't actually matter, you know, where exactly in the community or the industry you're in. This is a relevant topic to anyone that works in this industry. And on that note, I'm going to pass it to Ariel to share with us what is psychological safety.
Yeah, so I mean, I would start by saying, like, we hear that term, and I think it's something that we can all understand that it's not very present without even knowing too deeply. I mean, it's just like you hear those terms, and the thing that resonates with me a lot is the notion of leaving your feelings and emotions at the door. And to me, right off the bat, without even going too deep into it, it's like that doesn't sound very psychologically safe. So it was classically defined by Amy Edmondson, who's a professor of business at Harvard University and a scholar in leadership and organization. And she said it's a shared belief held by members of a team that they are safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It describes a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect in which people are comfortable being themselves. So I guess just starting there as again, just the entryway into this conversation, I feel like we can take and dissect that a little bit. Hassel, like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. So if anyone's wanting to reread that or, make notes of that definition, we actually created a one-pager for everyone here. If you click under handouts, there's a little link for a PDF. The psychological safety one-pager is available to everyone and anyone. And as well as for any chance you forget to click it right now, it will be available at the not9to5.org website as well on the resources page. But one part of that definition that I really speaks to me is the shared section of that. So it's a shared belief. And I just want to highlight that because I think, sometimes you think, well, I'm the manager and I believe in psychological safety, so it's going to work. But you actually need everyone to buy in. So it only works if it's a shared belief that everyone has bought into and everyone's on board. Suzanne, I know you also wanted to speak to the word safe in that definition. And then Alex, if you could speak to the word interpersonal as well.
Yeah, thank you, Hassel, and thank you, Ariel, both. I mean, I think the word safe in itself, it has so many connotations and it relates to so many things. And speaking in specifically to kitchen culture, to speaking specifically within this hospitality industry, I think we have to really think about when we go to our workplaces and how safe do we feel? Do we feel safe enough to be able to speak to a manager? Do we feel safe enough to speak to a co-worker? Do we feel safe enough to be honest, to be vulnerable, to share with all of maybe some of the things that are going on personally in your life when you are already aware that the moment you walk through that front door, that threshold, you have to check it at the door. That's what you've been asked. That's what you've been asked forever. And that's what you're being asked every day that you arrive at work. And I think that, we want to really define and understand what safe means in trying to, not just rely upon managers and owners and restaurateurs to do this, but for you to also find your safe space. For you to be able to find safe co-workers, for you to be able to find safe words, vocabulary, messaging that really speaks true to where you are personally. And if you need help and if you need support in that, there is, that you can understand that you might not have the answers and that you might actually need to rely upon somebody. You might need to ask someone for some support, and that it's okay to ask for support. But is there a safety space within your workplace that you can do that? And so I think safe for me is really important. And being a person of color, feeling safe in spaces where someone's going to understand the complexities that you're dealing with. Being a woman in kitchens, being a femme, being a trans, wherever you relate, whatever your community, making sure that you're recognized and that you are represented. And then if your representation is not there, then you have to find either a new safe space or need to create space for yourself and work within, what you have. And then sometimes you have to create it yourself as well.
And speaking to the interpersonal trust and mutual respect part of this definition is, it all kind of circles back to the same thing, is that especially if you're a manager or an owner or something like that, it's one thing to say, I'm creating safe space, this space is safe, but if you can't operate with empathy and with the understanding and the mutual respect for your team, that they are also, people with issues, problems, a life. They're not just in this servitude of dedicating themselves to their job or to their customers. Then the rest of it is pretty pointless. So being able to create a system of trust from you to your team, and then your team also to you. If you don't have that, then it almost doesn't matter that you have a safe space, because if people don't feel like, it's almost one and the same. They're almost the same thing, because if they don't feel like they can tell you like, hey, I'm having a really hard day emotionally today. I'm stuck in my head. I just feel sad or whatever it is, and I can't let it go. If they can't tell you that and hope that you as like a manager or owner can understand what they might be going through, then you can't possibly have a safe space. So I guess definitely can't be a safe space. They are very mutually exclusive in that way.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there. LP, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think everyone touched on it pretty well. I think the only thing I want to end that with is just ensuring that this idea of saying something, and we're kind of all in a position right now where there are a lot of initiatives that we're implementing in our bars or attempting to, and it's great to be on the side of I want reform and I want change and I want safe spaces. But today we'll really explore how we implement this and how this is specific to each establishment. This does not look the same in every space and every place that we put it in.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. It's definitely not a one size fits all, because every place is so different. And, I think one of the things that I constantly reiterate to people when I'm talking about this is that it's also about a journey. It's not a destination. It's not like you start up all these practices and all of a sudden you have a psychological safe environment. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of, as Hassel mentioned earlier, it takes, several people, everyone buying in and several people having conversations and being open. I think as an industry, we're not good at asking for help. We're not good at allowing ourselves to make mistakes. And I think that's actually can be quite damaging. Really psychological safety is the ability to make mistakes and, be wrong without any negative consequences. And, I think when it comes down to that and you hear it like that, we understand how far off our industry has been for so long, because of the fact that we do live very much in this like we chef, like I don't know how to boil water until you tell me how to boil water kind of vibe. And so the thing is that we need to encourage mistakes to be made, and we need to be vulnerable. We need to allow people to, and ourselves too, like be vulnerable. Like it's contagious. So the more we're vulnerable and the more we're encouraging that in the safe spaces Suzanne highlighted, we need to take risks. We need to make mistakes. Like all of this is so crucial in setting the stage for this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the real key part in that is the being vulnerable, making mistakes, and being able to take risks without any negative consequence, or being looked at differently. Because that's, I think, what prevents us a lot of times. So just for some context, why are we talking about psychological safety? We work in bars, we work in restaurants, we work in cafes, hotels. I'm serving people food and beverages, and why does psychological safety matter? Why is it important? And I think for some context, what it comes down to, in addition to what everyone else has shared, which is absolutely fundamental and true, is that there's real serious consequences, as we've seen. For anyone who's worked in this industry for a long time, there's some real serious consequences and damage and harm that can be caused when you don't have a space that provides psychological safety. And to paint a broader picture of the industry, like it was already mentioned before, but I want to reiterate this whole check your stuff at the door, and repress and suppress, and vulnerability is a weakness, and you need to suck it up. I mean, these are all messages that I grew up being told my whole career. So there was about a decade of serving, hosting, bartending, for me, and then about a decade of like managing being an owner operator. And in both roles, there was not very many times I worked in a space that was actually providing psychological safety. I can count 3 in my entire career, and I have about a 20-year career. And in those 3, 2 of the 3 I created. So, to Suzanne's point earlier, sometimes you have to be the one that creates it, and that's a privilege. I definitely recognize that as an entrepreneur, as an owner operator, I was able to do that. But I think that it's just really important to think about, the context of why are we talking about this. So to touch on that, Lauren, LP, I wanted to kick it to you in terms of if you can provide some context, from your perspective on why we're talking about this today for our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to preface this by kind of talking about this idea of trust versus psychological safety, because I think that the two are often misinterpreted and misunderstood. So psychological safety is belief that your environment is safe for interpersonal risk taking. It's similar, but it's very different from trust. So trust is, will you give others the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? And psychological safety is, will others give you the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? And very similar, but obviously we understand what the difference is there, right? So when we're looking at psychological safety, it is really important that we're looking at both sides. What part do I play as an employee, and what part does my employer play? What are their responsibilities and their roles in ensuring that we're creating a picture that is safe on both sides, right? So with psychological safety, team members feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. And with that, when we're building that, we have dependability that ends up occurring. And team members get things done on time and meet, high bars for excellence. And that's what we want. We want, safe spaces where people feel that they can speak up, that they can be involved, that they can, act on their impulse and aligned with who they are truly as people, and that they can complete tasks without fear of repercussion. Because we should be in spaces where we can feel that mistakes are learning opportunities and not things that will hinder our growth, right? With that dependability being built, we have structure and clarity that occurs. So team members have clear roles, plans, and goals. And while that is obviously on the side of the employee to ensure that they are complying with these standards, it's really up to the employer to ensure that these standards are discussed and that they are understood. Because if we don't have a clear idea of what our role is, then how can we expect to comply? How can we expect to do our jobs if we don't understand what our job entails, right? And then as a result, we have meaning. So work is personally important to the team member. There's meaning in the work that they're completing and the tasks that they are being completed, right? And I mean, with this, I think it's actually one of the more important topics that we touch on when discussing psychological safety, because if we are completing our task, our employees are happy, right? But we are happy. And if we along the way can figure out what our job means to us, what part we play, and what role we have in our jobs, that's where that happiness comes, and transitioning into this idea of impact, that we can be impactful with our work, that we can, truly place ourselves in a position where we are creating change, and that we are excelling. We don't want to be stagnant in the roles that we have as employees. So the reason why we're really discussing this today is to really just touch on the fact that, psychological safety is not just psychological safety. It actually impacts the picture as a whole. It impacts our overall wellness. It impacts, the way that we perform. It impacts the environment that we are creating in our establishments. And additionally, depending on the environment that we're in, it creates a standard that follows us once we leave that establishment and we go to our next ones, right? And what we're willing to accept and what we're willing to change. So that's why we're talking about this today.
Thanks, LP. I love that. One thing I want to kind of expand on a little bit is you talked a little bit about a stagnant workplace, and like I personally, and I'm sure all of us who have been in the industry for a while, have been in environments that just are not, healthy and perhaps toxic, stagnant, and at the time, I don't know that I could fully identify, but in retrospect, looking back on things, it's like, oh, yeah, I can see it. Like I got yelled at before I even know how to make a recipe. You know, it was a developing young cook, and I didn't know how to make something, and I got in trouble for making it wrong, but I wasn't shown how to make it. So I definitely think that I guess focusing on, for me, what I would like to talk about is just the elements and what we can pinpoint as some of the symptoms of like a workplace that's not psychologically safe. Alex, you wanna touch on this a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about, our past experiences working in bars or restaurants where, we've made a mistake and been afraid to, maybe tell our bosses about it, or, come into work really, really struggling with having to think about having to talk to guests that night because we've had a hard day or something like that. And, not being able to be open and transparent with our employers in circumstances like that, really to me makes me think about how, in a lot of ways, like working in hospitality, whether you're front of house and like guest facing or back of house, is that you're kind of treated in a lot of ways like you're not allowed to like be an individual or be unique in any way, because the whole point of your job is to be there to serve other people. So in a lot of ways, there's been this kind of adoption of having a lack of personality when it comes to serving other people, because you need to, spend your entire, career taking care of others. So like you have to have this whole like lack of person that comes with that. And when that happens, I think the reason why we've gotten to the point where we even have to be having these conversations is because when you can't have individuals working in workplaces, then there's like this lack of like progress in the community, because you're really kind of just, show up, serve the people, don't ask questions, don't be like an individual, and then go home and then do it again. And so, what happens when we don't have psychological safety is that we get to where we are now, where like there are people suffering from, mental health issues, from unhealthy workplaces, from, not being treated like normal people, and to where you have this like disease in our industry that you really have to almost break apart the entire industry and put it back together, which is really scary and really overwhelming, but in some ways, a blessing in disguise, because you kind of have an opportunity to completely change it and get rid of the things that you don't like. The unfortunate part is that we're in a society that's very used to it being exactly the way it is now. And so changing it will be very difficult, because we've had years and years of, society accepting that this is the way it is. But unfortunately, it doesn't need to, well, fortunately, it doesn't need to stay that way. Unfortunately, it's going to be a lot of work to change it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point. We definitely have so many norms and outdated, archaic principles. Suzanne, what are your thoughts here on this kind of like negative, poor psychological safety within the workplace?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to it. I think to both LP and to Alex's point, I think that, having these conversations are in and itself are just uncomfortable. Like, what do you do when you don't know where to go? What do you do when you can't really verbally or even express what's going on in your workplace? Because it's just sometimes it's scary, because that's the only job you can get at the time. Maybe you only have access to this particular space because that's where you live, or maybe you find that you have habits that kind of find you back in these same type of positions over and over again, because you're like walking with trauma, and you've been affected by something that you don't even know that is directly affecting how you can find a workplace that is safe. I'm not understanding that psychologically there is something more that's happening. It's not just you that can't keep a job. It's so many. It's a pile of things. It's rhetoric. It's this archaic way of being that has been carried over from generations and generations, that has never been confronted, that's never been broken down, that's never been dismantled, that's never been discussed, that has people thinking like, oh, we can't talk about that, we just got to get to work, keep your head down and keep your head down in it. And it's like, we have an opportunity, there's the silver linings of what COVID has done for us as an industry. It's fucked up a lot. I mean, I've shut my business, and I'm sorry to be cussing, but like, it really has me thinking, like, if this isn't the time right now for us to really understand that we have an opportunity to pull back some of those facades and those things that we've always used as like our shield, to be like, well, it's the restaurant industry, you know how it is, it's just what it is. It's like, no more. Like, we can't. Like, I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating right. I'm not able to hold a job long enough. You always find yourself blaming yourself when really truly there's something else going on. And you maybe have never had the time, or you've never been in a space that you can actually dissect and really truly understand and comprehend what's been going on, and how this has been really truly affecting you for probably pretty much your whole career within this industry. And it's not just you, it's fundamentally the systemic problems within this industry. And then we can go even further and talk about the government, but sticking it to the hospitality industry, I think that's really truly, my feeling on struggles that I have had within this industry, that I have seen and I've heard from my peers, my coworkers, my team members, my sous chefs, everyone that has ever worked with me and that I've worked with. So, yeah.
Suzanne, it's so interesting that you brought up the point of like jumping from job to job. It just like immediately pinged in my head of like, even myself as somebody who like has to look at people's resumes and, interview people. It's like, oh, this person only worked here for a year, here for a year, they jumped around. And we immediately always are like, oh, there's something wrong with them. We never think like, maybe there's a problem with like all of these not healthy workplaces. And not that, it's never black and white, it's never cut and dry. Everyone's situation is different, but it's never like, oh, maybe there are issues with there not being safe workplaces or healthy workplaces. I think that's a big part of LP and my, passion for starting Focus on Health, is that like we believe that this can be your career. Like, you server, steward, line cook, bartender, bar owner, bar manager, like those are all legitimate careers. And the issue isn't like, well, the issue is society, obviously, but also like that we're not creating healthy environments for people to work in.
I totally agree, Alex. And Suzanne, I think both those points are so valid, because it's so true. There's a lot of retention problems. There's a lot of issues with bouncing around. I know I did. And, sometimes it depended. Like, sometimes I wasn't safe and I needed to get out of there. And sometimes I just wanted something different. But the workplace trauma point that you made, Suzanne, I think is so valid. And it actually, the fact that you could potentially have a situation in a job that leaves you with workplace trauma, which is a very likely if you work in this industry for more than 3 years, for example, and also can contribute to, like what you said, Alex, as to why you would want to leave, or why you wouldn't want to stay somewhere for too long. So I thank you for those points. Those were so important to think about. And I think, as much as we've talked about what it's like without psychological safety, I think let's shift gears and move into what it looks like with psychological safety. So, when you implement psychological safety and you have the shared belief and you have everyone on board, willing to take risks and be vulnerable, I think one part that gets often missed is that there actually is ROI to some of this. There's not, it is about safety and it is about people feeling good and productivity, but there's also these other amazing side effects that are like byproducts of having spaces that are psychologically safe. So just to name a few, for example, productivity and high performing teams is a side effect and a byproduct of psychological safe workspaces. This has been researched extensively in the tech industry. Our industry is a little behind on research and data. It's particular to this topic. But if you Google, psychological safety and Google did a study a number of years ago where they got a number of results through hundreds of teams and hundreds of hundreds of participants in the research study that showed this. And psychological safety became actually the most important factor for productivity and high performing teams. So even when it comes down to just your business operating at peak performance, this is a key ingredient in your recipe that you need. And then just when we look at food and beverage, it's such a creative industry. When you have psychological safety in the workplace, you have high levels of innovation, creativity, ingenuity. And so imagine our industry, the products and the menus and the recipes and all these different, brands and bars and restaurants that would be created if there was, more environments that were providing this. So those are just a few examples, but I also wanted to throw it to focus on health. I know you wanted to talk about some examples as well of what a team with psychological safety looks like. So either Alex or LP, I don't know who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So something you said I want to piggyback on shortly, but so in order to innovate, we need to innovate together. So together is the key word. Team is so important in this topic, because when we're working at establishments, we're not working by ourselves. We may be working at ourselves in instances, but this cannot occur with one person, feeling the need to implement it. Innovation really needs to occur together. And when I think about psychological safety and psychological danger, because that would be the lack of psychological safety, right? I think of it in quadrants. And we want to think of it as two things. When psychological safety is low or high, and when accountability is low or high, because those two are so interconnected. When psychological safety is low and accountability is low, we're in the apathy zone. When psychological safety is high and accountability is low, we're in the comfort zone. When psychological safety is low and accountability is high, we're in the anxiety zone. And then when psychological safety is high and accountability is high, we're in the learning zone. And we want to be in the learning zone. And I get it. We're not in a perfect and ideal world at all instances and times. But when we understand the mechanism, when we understand where we are on that scale, then we can adjust the way that we approach implementing psychological safety into our workspaces and places. The reason I bring this up is because having an understanding of that truly allows us to see this bigger picture that we touched on earlier. Psychological safety affecting the individual, the group, and the organization. And different things occur with those different levels, right? As an individual, we might see proactive personality. With group, that might be something like inclusive leadership or even role clarity, which I will stress and stress again because I think it's something that often goes to the wayside. We are in an industry where people are popping in and out of jobs very often. And if that doesn't raise a red flag to ensure we are providing that clarity, then I think that we all need to kind of take a step back and really reflect. We want to ensure that we don't have that turnover and that we are in a space where people do feel safe. And with that comes clarity. Additionally, I think we think of this word respect and it's often one-sided, like I respect my manager. Yeah, but does your manager respect you? And that mutual respect is something else we want to be able to see. And then lastly, organization. That's supportive work context. That's, commitment-based HR practices. Again, going back to this idea of it's one thing to say it, but it's another to implement it. So really ensuring that we're that it's tangible, that it's not just being said, but there are things that are actually being done to ensure that this is something that's occurring. And then just to end with a few examples, when there is psychological safety present, we see things like productive disagreement. There's nothing wrong with disagreeing with anyone, but it needs to be productive and free exchange of ideas. Because I'm sure we're all guilty of having worked at a place where it was very much known that if you are not the manager, your idea is not relevant by any means, and that's just not okay. So, I know that when I was managing at the last place I worked at, we scheduled weekly one-on-ones with our staff or 10-minute check-ins just to see how they were doing. Humanize the situation, and it becomes a very natural thing. We talk about, not to go off tangent, we talk about diversity and inclusion. It's like if we just treat people, as what they are, then this stuff really does come naturally. So we just want to ensure that we're doing that with great intention, right?
Lauren, can I just ask you, we got a request if you could please repeat the quadrant again. Do you mind?
Yeah, I don't mind at all.
Okay.
And I'll follow up with a link, but the quadrant is as follows. So we have psychological safety and accountability, and there's a low and high on each side. So if you follow with me, psychological safety, when that is low and accountability is low, we have the apathy zone. When psychological safety is high and accountability is low, we have the comfort zone. When psychological safety is high and accountability is high, we have the learning zone. And when psychological safety is low and accountability is high, we have the anxiety zone. So just, again, just kind of go back, it's important to understand where you are, what part you play, whether you're the employee or the employer.
I had another example. I was, sorry, go ahead, Ariel.
Oh, so I was just saying I love that. I really do. I think that's it's such an interesting way to think about the quadrants. I'd never considered that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
I was just going to add, as a person who's been learning to manage from, a younger age than I think was probably even appropriate for me to be managing people. And like younger in my career than I probably should have been managing people. One that I've, that resonates with me when like talking about how to create like psychological safety in workplaces and learning to manage people is the idea of like how you correct people and how to correct people with empathy. And that's one actually I've still really struggled to learn. And it's like something I have to actively practice when I still, but the whole concept of like, rather than reacting with like frustration or anger, being able to look at a situation empathetically and ask more helpful questions to find solutions. So, if you feel like somebody is not like reading their workplace communications, like, instinct as a manager is to just be like, read your messages. Like, it's not that hard, read your messages, and learning to instead say like, how can I better communicate to you? Is there a way to make this easier for you? Or is there something about the way we communicate currently that doesn't work for you? And it's, it's the toughest part about learning to manage is learning that every single person needs to be managed differently. And I think that takes understanding that you are working with people and not just like robots, or people that, people without their own personalities or their own lives. So like, understanding that being able to approach any situation with empathy is one of the most important things that I still am trying to learn in this career.
Yeah,
Just wanted to add to that, if that's okay, guys. It just makes me think, because all of this, and Lauren, thank you again for those quadrants. It really, it really is something to see, something that you probably maybe have brought into, like, I've brought something similar to into my spaces I've owned and run and operated, but never really kind of had any core foundation understanding of what happens in these different quadrants and in different spaces. But I think as an employee, someone coming in, I think you really have to be mindful of like the language that you're hearing, even in the very beginning stages, in the interviewing stages. Like if you're going in for a job interview, you're not going in there to just be interviewed. You're also going in there to interview them, to hear the language that they're using, to see the spaces that they've created, and to see the engagement. So it's almost like, stepping into an interview knowing that you can actually see the signs of a space that may not be the right psychologically safe space that you want to be in. You can see that even from that moment. And you want to really kind of, and I think we'll go into that after this, of these actionable steps and some things that you can look out for when sitting in an interview, and what to listen for, what questions to ask when they say, do you have any questions? And sometimes you might have the fundamental questions like, what's the cost, like what's the rate, what's the salary, things of that. But I think there are also great questions that will help you, give you some insight onto what type of environment. And you want to make sure that you're going to be stepping into an environment that really is going to put you like to help elevate you to that next level of what you're looking to achieve, you know. And I just that was my kind of takeaway that I wanted to add, because I felt really, really inspired by what everyone's been saying. And I just feel like I can remember going into interviews of always feeling like I'm, you know, nervous and anxious and, you know, really, really, you know, like uncertain. And, you know, sometimes going in with a little bit of that insight that you're also interviewing your possible new employers, and that you have a position, you have a role in this, and you can already kind of set the tone of what you need to be in, the type of spaces, from that first interaction and that first exchange.
I just wanted to add one thing for anyone that was looking to get another copy of or repeat the quadrant and get or learn more about that. It is in Amy Edmondson's book called The Fearless Organization. So if you want to learn more about psychological safety, that book is in our one-pagers listed under further reading and resources. So if you do want to learn more about the quadrant or learn more about how to apply that thinking, I definitely recommend checking out the book, The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. Okay, sorry, Ariel, all you.
Thank you. No, that's helpful, actually. Alex, I think you touched on such an interesting thing that was a takeaway for me about the fact that a lot of managers often manage before they really may be, you know, ready. We kind of get thrown into this, and I think oftentimes, you know, you get promoted to sous chefs because you know how to cook. You might get promoted to an assistant general manager or a bartender, or however you know, whatever it is, just because of the fact that you're owning the floor, or you can run a busy service. But there's such an emotional intelligence required to be able to manage, because as you stated, you know, everyone does require a different type of attention and responds to different types of management. And really our goal as managers is to actually treat them as they want to be treated. And they'll perform the best when we're able to actually nourish them. And I find that when we get to a point where we can nourish on several different levels, then we'll find, as Hassel mentioned earlier, that the ROI will be a lot more robust. So I guess with that said, I want to dive into a little bit more tangible takeaways of like what people can actually do from a tool set perspective. I don't know, FOH, you guys want to start?
Yeah, I think we can start. So when we're talking about psychological safety in the workspace, I just, again, want to stress this idea that it's as much the responsibility of the employer as it is the employee, but it's really everyone's collective responsibility, right? So the thing I really wanted to start with is conflict, because I think that's one of the things that really showcases itself in our establishments, whether that is, you know, peer-to-peer, employee-to-employee, employee-to-employer, whatever it may be, and how we decide to approach it. I think it's really important that we're selective with not only the language we decide to use, when we decide to use it, you know, are we emotionally burdened in that instance? Are we driven by emotion? Am I gonna have a rational response? Am I gonna be really placing myself in a position where I'm being productive, right? So I really advise people in these instances to take a deep breath, think about, you know, what they want to react and what they want the outcome to be at the end of the day. When we are in very stressful situations, fight or flight kicks in. You know, we see that in many instances. And really ensure that we are utilizing, you know, compromising solutions. And it always doesn't have to be a competition. I know that we may feel threatened depending on the instance or situation that we're encountering, but just really take that into consideration prior to engaging in those conversations. Alex, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was like clicked on our notes and then I was like trying to unmute myself and pressing the wrong thing. Yeah, so the next note that we have about, you know, increasing psychological safety in the workplace is understanding that everyone is human. And like, I feel like I've probably harped on this so much during this like webinar already, but it's so important that like, you know, understanding that like I think it's interesting because I think in our industry in particular, it's a lot of people who strive for perfection. In a lot of ways, it's like very much a common goal. I think for most people who end up in this industry is like how, we want to be the best. We want to be perfect. From the food that we plate to the way that we drop food in front of a guest, all the way down. And so I think that a lot of times that gets taken so far that it can become damaging for your workplace environment because people aren't allowed to make any kind of mistake because everything has to be perfect. So understanding that everyone is human and makes mistakes, and then on top of that, that they're, it's like a two-part issue. The other part being that we're all unique and different and have, different things that that make us happy, different things that make us sad or anxious or depressed, have different beliefs and perspectives. And so, there can be a common goal of a workplace that everyone can work to, but people can still be human and different and individualistic, and make mistakes without damaging the common goal of the workplace at the same time. And I think it's a hard one for a lot of us to remember because we do like strive so hard to be perfect, especially in an industry where it's like very cutthroat. It's like you get, you make one mistake, you get one star Yelp review, and especially in a time right now where it's like everyone is like struggling to like be the best so that people will come back during a time where it's hard to get business. So like right now more than ever, like learning how to accept that mistakes still happen is very important.
Yeah. The next thing we have is be curious, not judgmental. And it's been one of those things that I think I'm truly leaning into, especially during this time, being at home and just being idle and having time to think. But I think it's important that we're placing ourselves in a position where we question the message and understand the mechanism. Criticism escalates conflict. We know that. And I think this kind of goes back to the first thing I was stating, that we should say what we mean and mean what we say. And be intentional with the words that we utilize, and understanding that everyone has different beliefs, perspectives, hopes, and motivations, that we can get to a resolution without being judgmental, right? Maybe saying something like, can we discuss the steps on how to get to a resolution together, or how to get to the common goal together, versus saying like that's dumb or that's stupid or whatever it may be, because words do matter. Alex, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, we have a couple more, but I know we're also like kind of cutting it on time, so I wanted y'all to say if you wanted us to skip ahead.
One more, and then we'll throw it to Suzanne, because I'd love to hear what Suzanne has to say.
And also, just so everyone listening knows, all of FOH's points are in the one-pager, so just download the one-pager and you can read them in full.
The last one that I'll add in is being open to feedback. I think that one's really hard, and I find it incredibly ironic because we all like want to be so perfect, but we also forget that like part of being better is like being given feedback. So being able to hear without offense feedback is so important, and then internalizing it, taking it to heart, thinking about it, but not like holding on to it and letting it affect you in any kind of negative way. But then on top of that, something else that I've learned in the last like couple of years of managing is how important it is to give positive feedback as well as a manager or a coworker. We always say at the bar, you give positive feedback in public and negative feedback in private. And that's something also that I'd just never been taught as a manager. But yeah, like, being open to receiving feedback and then giving feedback and learning how to do it in a way that's appropriate for each of your employees. And then also remembering to give positive feedback and praise.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's so much of that is something that, to the point of being human, that you're always going to reflect back on, and I think what we practice at my last restaurant was a lot of physical adaptations for the workspace, actually physically making the workspace safer. So a lot of that came down to us providing staff meals, appropriate staff meals. You know, we had staff where a good percentage of my staff were Muslim. So making sure that we were creating meals that accommodated to their dietary and their lifestyle, you know, concerns and their restrictions, and also making sure that we were respectful and mindful of the times that we designated for staff meals, because sometimes folks aren't arriving at 4 to jump in. Sometimes folks are running late. Sometimes folks are you know, going to surpass or miss staff meals. So making sure that there's something, and in that staff meal, making sure, being a chef, like my you know, my experience and my, it really goes down to creating whole meals, eating food that is going to give your staff and your team and yourself some brain power, some like nutrient rich foods, not just the best foods that we're going to serve and offer to our guests, but to our team and ourselves. Because if we aren't eating well and if we're not understanding the importance of healing our own selves, then how can we actually turn the table and ask anyone to go and do that for guests that are coming into our establishments? You know, respecting those that are, you know, maybe on the road to sobriety, and making sure that an offering, if you do a drink at the end of the meal, that it's maybe definitely a non-alcoholic offering, and making sure that people have the options, people have choices. And when you're in those choices, that you don't feel that it's weird to not ask or take a beer, that you don't feel like you ashamed that you can't just announce that you know, I'm actually going to pass on that. Can I get a juice, or can I get a kombucha, or whatever might be being offered? Creating spaces and opportunities and happy hours that don't just look like maybe the more traditional happy hours that we're accustomed to, but creating something that's really is happy and joyful, and having a space that allows for that, those endorphins to really be activated. Because we show up and we got to know that in order to show up, we've got to be celebrated, we've got to be in a space that is going to praise us and that we feel that we want to be in, you know, like we want excited about staff meal, we're excited about being in a space where on the wall there are affirmation and mantras, and we physically did that in our space, and it really made a difference. In the staff changing areas, we would have literally signs on the wall that said, you know, you can do this, or I know today might feel heavy, but know that tomorrow turning around the corner can be quite different. So finding affirmations, going online, you know, picking a few, asking the team if they have any that they want to share with the rest of the team. Make it like a group project almost, you know, and almost, you know, identify someone to like take that on like for the month to put up some new affirmations, so that people feel like, you know, it's we're constantly changing, we're constantly growing, and we want to make sure our space is evolving with the fact that our team is also evolving, you know, that our team is also growing. And in addition to all of that is like creating a comment box. That was another thing that we did, was we actually had a box that, you know, it was open for everyone, managers, staff, you know, whoever wanted to make a comment. You don't have to put your name on it. You don't have to put the time or anything. Throw it in the box, and eventually, and then someone bi-weekly will read those, and then we'll read them out to the team, just to kind of keep that engagement. Keep your team and yourself engaged in like transparency at its fullest, making sure that you're really adhering to that, and you know, making this physical space a space that is physically safe, mentally safe, and really embraced and empathetic. And I think like overall, like for us, we saw such a shift in the overall team morale. And during the holiday time, we could see the joy of everybody coming together. And right now we're stepping into the end of the year and all of this. And so you just want to make sure that if you have the opportunity to do your part, to really create that physical space, because it does matter and it does impact.
Suzanne, I love everything you just said. It's such practical, like that's just so practical. It's such an actionable step. And you know, LP and Alex, thank you for what you shared as well, because there's definitely shifts that, you know, it's going to take a long time, but it is possible. And I think that's the most important thing, is that there is hope, and it is possible, and it will take a lot of work, and it will take a long time, but we can definitely start small and baby steps. And also just for ourselves, like anyone who's listening that's thinking of like how to bring this into the workplace, you know, you're going to make mistakes. And, you know, you're gonna have to apply all of these, you know, measures and beliefs and thoughts for yourself as well. And that's okay. You know, you're gonna have to get vulnerable yourself. And that's uncomfortable. But, you know, that is how we start to shift, and that is how we start to move forward. So there's one question here before our time runs out. I did want to try to address with the panel. I'll say maybe a few words and then I'll pass it off to anyone else that wants to take it. So the question says, in terms of, you know, intergenerational pain and trauma, similar to the managerial hierarchy in restaurants, question mark, is this like what we experience in families? I love this question so much because I think that it really speaks to the complexity of unlearning and to how much work and how much time goes into addressing this topic. You know, all the things that we shared today are fundamentally important to this, but I truly, truly believe that you really need to start with yourself. And then from there, it comes outwards, you know? So you have to get vulnerable. You have to be cool with yourself making mistakes. Because Alex, what you said is so true. Perfectionism is a virus that's flooded through this industry for sure. I feel like we're all infected with it. And especially as a server, like my tips are reliant on that. You know, my tips are reliant on me being quote unquote perfect.
Oh
so,
man,
you know,
don't even get started.
I know. So anyways,
Round two.
I know, right? So panel number 2, we will continue on tips. But I love this question so much because I think that there is a similarity between intergenerational trauma that gets passed down in your family and intergenerational trauma that gets passed down in the workplace. You know, so I don't know, anyone else wants to take it from me?
Suzanne, I feel like you're looking like, I feel like you got something.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I mean, wonderful question. I honestly feel like mine's more of a story. You know, I remember when I graduated from this my culinary program that I attended in New York, and my father said to me in the most sincere and honest of tones, was like, how are you going to be working in a kitchen when we have been fighting to keep us as Black people and people of color out of kitchens? And I was like, oh damn, yes, you're right. You know, and it was, and that to me was like, whew, yeah, that's a huge conversation, you know. And I don't know if, you know, we have the time today to get into it, but I just want to touch on the fact that absolutely being a Black woman in the kitchen and reading and doing the reading and doing the work that I have been doing definitely has me going way back into my early roots, into my great grandmother, into my ancestors, and this feeling of like, is this the right space for me? And how do I step into a space knowing that I'm carrying a bit of that every time I walk into a kitchen, but knowing that I have to redefine what that conversation is for myself.
Right.
Respecting that the history and the ancestors, but also respecting myself and how I see myself now, and in carrying the honor of being, a woman that cooks and a woman that feeds and feeding soul, and my own interpretation of healing and food and sharing and family meals and all of that. And so that's my quick, fast response to a really huge but important question. And I thank the viewer for sending that and giving us an opportunity to touch on it.
Definitely. We're at time, but Alex and LP, is there anything you want to end us on?
LP, do you have anything you want to add?
I think I want to end just by simply saying that everyone plays a part, and you just need to really sit with yourself and figure out what part you play, and what your goal is. What do you want your establishment to look like at the end of the day, and how your decisions impact others and not just yourself.
Yeah,
I love that.
I'll just add that, you know, there's a lot of power in being vulnerable with your staff, with your family, or, you know, close friends, or even just with strangers. There's so much power in that vulnerability. And just for me personally, my own experiences, I've really found myself stronger from that vulnerability. And it's not easy, and it's not like something you can just like quickly do, but you know, just incorporating that into my life has been really transformative in how I view myself and my coworkers and my employers and everyone else in my life. So
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you want to find Ariel and I, we are at not9to5.org. And, you know, our slide earlier showed how to get in touch with the rest of us. I so appreciate your time, Suzanne, LP, Alex, Ariel, everyone listening. I hope that this was a good discussion, and thank you to James Beard Foundation for allowing for this to happen.
thank you. Thank you for
so
having
Yeah,
us.
thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys.
Bye, everyone.